Back in the 60s, Eastside High School was one of the top schools in Paterson, New Jersey. Joe teaches at this school, and his class loves him because he shares important lessons with kindness and adds fun competitions. One morning, his class gets interrupted by fellow teacher Frank, who says they're having a meeting of the union executive board without them. Joe storms into the meeting, fuming, and shouts at everyone for not backing his reform ideas and for folding whenever the local government tells them to stay quiet. The board is fed up with Joe's behavior and decides to move him to another school. 20 years later, Eastside High has really gone downhill, and now people call it a cauldron of violence. The building has definitely lost its shine, and the students seem to have no clue about good behavior. Bullying and violence are everywhere in the halls. Students ignore teachers and even attack them when they step in. Illegal drugs and weapons are traded like they're nothing. A lot of students are struggling to pass the minimum basic skills test, which isn't great for Mayor Bobman. He really wants to avoid losing the school to state administration since it could hurt his chances in the election. Frank, now the school superintendent, and Mr. Rosenberg, the school board attorney, come to the only logical conclusion. They need to bring Joe back. Bobman isn't a fan of the idea, but he goes along with it since he has no other option. Frank and Rosenberg visit Joe to offer him the principal position at Eastside, but Joe declines, saying he understands the mayor is only looking out for himself, not the kids. But Frank convinces him to rethink things by highlighting that Joe's wild antics haven't really changed anything, and he shouldn't carry that regret forever. The next day, Joe arrives at Eastside as the new principal. He gathers the other teachers for a meeting and quickly asserts his authority, declaring that he's the only one allowed to speak during the discussions. He asks for a list of all the students involved in criminal activities, then tells the custodian to clean the walls and gets any student in detention to help out. Mr. Darnell, the English teacher, got demoted to being the assistant to the football coach. There will be guards in the hallways to help stop the violence, and all teachers need to focus on preparing the students for their next standardized test, since the school needs 75% approval, and last time they got less than 40. Next, Joe calls for a school assembly and brings all the troublemakers from the list up on stage. When Joe shows up, he runs into Kenesha, and she's really glad to see him since he used to be her elementary school principal. Joe steps onto the stage and calls for silence, but no one listens, and the troublemakers chuckle when he requests them to sing the school song. Thinking they can't be fixed, Joe decides to kick out all the troublemakers, assuring the other kids that they won't be bothered anymore. Security gets all the students off the stage, and that really helps everyone chill out, especially when Joe warns them they could be next if they don't hit the books. Joe's got a meeting with all the parents this afternoon. Liana, the mom of one of the kids who got expelled, is really upset about what went down, and a lot of other parents are backing her up. But Joe stands his ground and gives a speech about how a few bad apples can spoil the whole basket. He says he kicked out 300 kids to protect 2,700, and that he made a promise to God to save the school. This speech gets him the backing of nearly every parent, but Liana remains upset. The next day, Joe shows up at school and sees a kid waiting for him. Sam's got expelled and is trying to convince Joe he didn't do anything wrong, but Joe sees right through him and takes him up to the roof. He calls Sam a coward for not telling his parents about his expulsion, and warns him that using those illegal substances could kill him. If he really wants to die, he should just jump. Sam clearly says no and vows to improve, and Joe agrees to give him another shot. But if he slips up again, he's done for good. At lunch, Joe chats with students at different tables, listening to their thoughts and sharing some advice. He's glad to see Ray in a suit. It really sets a great example, unlike Sam and his friends who dress so casually. When Joe sees them bothering a girl, he makes them stand up, calls out their outfit in front of everyone, and then asks them to sing the school's song. He reminds everyone in the room not to move during the school song, so when Darnell bends down to pick up some trash, Joe sends him to his office. The boys don't even know the lyrics, so Joe ends up giving them detention. He tells everyone that from now on they need to be ready to sing the school song on command, or there will be consequences. Later, Joe visits the music teacher, Elliot, to share the news about the new rule. Elliot agrees, but she'll teach the school song once they finish training for the upcoming choir concert in New York. The kids are working on Mozart, and Elliot wants their effort to be appreciated. She calls out Joe, pointing out that he doesn't like it when other adults stand up to him. Joe responds by firing her and canceling the concert so the students can focus on the upcoming test. Starting now, Mrs. Powers, the pianist, will take over the music class. Later, in his meeting with Darnell, Joe gets called out once more. Darnell feels like he's being treated poorly and wants the principal to keep in mind that these are his students too. Darnell ends up getting suspended. Vice Principal Joan tries to get Joe to understand, saying Darnell is more than just a coach and that no one gets what Joe is up to. But Joe replies that's just how he likes it. The day of the practice test arrives, and all the students do their best while the teachers watch closely. Joe's eager for the results, so he sends Joan to the school board to grab the letter right away. One morning, a student's special presentation for the local press gets interrupted by an attack in the cafeteria. One of the boys who got expelled is back and is attacking Ray, and he has a knife too. Joe quickly grabs him and asks how he got in. Security says someone must have let him in from the inside. Right then, Joe decides to lock and chain all the school doors. Later on, Joe comes across Kanisha looking upset. She's really smart, but her grades have slipped since she lost her home because her mom doesn't want her around. Joe is set on helping, so he takes Joan to visit Kanisha's mom at her place. The mom shared that she had Kanisha as a teenager, which meant she had to give up her regular life to work. These days, she's working on getting clean, but it's really messing with her head. She figured it was best to send Kanisha with child services, but she always wanted her close and loved her deeply. Joe says he'll help her find a better job and a nicer place to live, but only if she takes Kanisha back and helps her focus on her studies. Liana hears about the chained doors in the news and decides to bring the complaint to the school board. Frank is giving Joe a hard time for acting so wild, saying that Liana is putting together a group to get rid of him and that the fire chief is backing her up. He believes Joe is pushing everyone away, just like he did with his wife. Now he's planning to write an apology letter to Elliot and Darnell. If Joe wants respect as an authority, he needs to show some respect too. Darnell's back, but the issues are still hanging around. Joe confronts the fire chief at the school, and with the press around, he manages to scare him off using a bat. Joan brings up her worries about this attitude, but as always, no one pays attention. Joe was really bummed when the next time he saw Ray was just to say goodbye since he had to leave the school. Later, Joe catches Sam and his friends just messing around in the bathroom. He has them sing the school's song and is surprised to hear a beautiful version done like a church choir. The boys confess it was Powers that showed them this, so Joe heads over to congratulate her and ask if she can teach everyone this version of the song from now on. Joe gets the practice test results and feels disappointed to see they only scored 33%. He gathers all the teachers in the gym and tells them their lack of efficiency is the reason for these poor results, so they need to work harder. Joe is looking to kick off a tutoring program and add a remedial reading course on Saturdays, but a teacher mentions that getting the kids to show up on weekends can be tough. He wants to visit every student's home and chat with their parents to get them involved, maybe even invite them along if they're not sure how to read. In the weeks that follow, teachers and students put in a lot of effort to prepare for the test, and Joe stays as engaged with his students as he can. Liana isn't satisfied yet, so she heads over to talk directly to Botman with the fire chief. Frank and Rosenberg are trying to back Joe up, but Botman boots them from the meeting and strikes a deal with Liana to keep her from swaying the town against him. Botman is going to get Joe fired, and Liana will rally people to back his campaign. Later in the bathroom, Botman chats with the fire chief about arresting Joe for the illegal chains after the test, not realizing that Rosenberg is in one of the stalls and overhears everything. Rosenberg tells Frank about this, and they head over to warn Joe, who quickly thinks of a plan. When the security guards spot the chief approaching, they'll announce Code 10 over the walkie-talkies, and the teachers can take off the chains for a bit. Later on, Joan attempts to chat with Joe about how their reading program is going, but he brushes her off, saying he's too busy right now and that his vice principal should handle things without always relying on him. At the end of the day, Joan tells Joe she wants a transfer, saying how frustrating it is to work with him. She describes him as an egomaniacal windbag who takes advantage of those who can't defend themselves, and notes that half the staff shares her feelings. They just haven't left yet because they care about the kids. Joan's had it with his disrespect and lack of support for the teachers, so she's ready to leave. The next day, right before assembly, Joe hands Joan her transfer papers. He talks to the kids about the school's bad reputation in town, motivating them to show they're not savages. He expresses his thanks to the teachers, giving Joan the credit for it. Then Power sings "Lean on Me," and the kids join in, eager to show the government they're not inferior. Seeing everyone at school come together, Joan makes the choice to stay. On test day, the students tackle the exam with confidence. There's a school board meeting coming up, and Liana is getting impatient, so Botman finally lets the fire chief go ahead and get a court order. At school, Kanisha finds out she's pregnant, but her boyfriend doubts he's the dad, even though she insists he's the only guy she's been with. Joe says he's there to help and assures them they'll come up with other options. But then a guard steps in to announce that the fire chief has arrived with Liana and some reporters. So Joe calls Code 10 to get the chains off, but the chief is one step ahead with a recording of the code. As a result, Joe ends up getting arrested for breaking the fire code, and now Joan has to take charge. That night, The school board meets, and Frank tries to defend Joe's work. However, Liana points out that the school only scored 33% on the practice test, which means Joe actually failed in his work. Out of nowhere, the meeting gets interrupted as all the students burst in, insisting that Joe be let go. Botman realizes it won't look good to fire someone with that much support, so he chats with Joe, asking him to tell the students to leave. When Joe says no, Botman brings out the heavy artillery and mentions that the cops are waiting outside. If the students start a riot, it could turn violent. Joe agrees to chat with them, but it's just for their safety, not because he believes they're in the wrong. When he comes out, Liana is chatting with the kids, but all she's getting is insults and reminders of everything Joe did for the school. He feels a bit emotional when they call him a father, but he's still anxious about the police, so Joe steps in and tells them to respect the law. Joe suddenly interrupts his speech, bringing in the test results with great news. The school has passed. While everyone is celebrating, Joe tells Botman that he and the state can go to hell. Joe keeps his job, and the students wrap up the night by singing the school song. When graduation time rolls around, Joe hands out the diplomas with thoughtful words just for each student.